Well, welcome everyone. First order of business is to ask that anyone who did not in fact appear on the list and who had registered to let us know that you are indeed here, so we make sure that you're included. We have three guests from NSF that I'd like to recognize. Tom Torgensen in Hydrologic Sciences. I didn't see him, but he was intending to attend. Bill Cooper, who is from the Environmental Engineering Program. Bill's here in the front. And Bruce Hamilton, who's also here in the front. He is in the Environmental Sustainability Program, and his program, in fact, has provided the money to support our activity today. I think the first thing to do is quickly look at our agenda. It's in front of you, and see how we're going to structure our presentations. We're going to have two groups, and there's going to be three people in each group. And if you look at the agenda, you'll see who those individuals are and what their presentations will be. We're going to have our keynote speaker, which is Stavros Papadopoulos. At lunch, we will have our luncheon speaker, and that's Bill Alley. Then, as Giannis pointed out, he will summarize the activities of the day, and we'll have a lunch, and you're all then excused. So I will begin by introducing Stavros Papadopoulos, who has been a colleague of mine since I first started in this profession back in 1968. I've asked each of the speakers to provide me with a brief summary, and so I'm going to actually present that word for word from what they gave me with a little modification here and there. So Stavros Papadopoulos is the founder and the senior principal of SS Papadopoulos and Associates, which is an environmental and water resources consulting firm established in 1979. He received his doctorate in civil engineering from Princeton University in 1964. And Stavros, you may have been the only person that DeWeest ever graduated. Is that right?
No, actually, Dr. Cowan was one of DeWeest.
I should have known Mary would correct me. So we'll remove that from the record. All right, now that I've lost my place in line here, let's get started again. So he conducted research at the U.S. Geological Survey, taught at the University of Minnesota and the University of Illinois, Chicago Circle. He served as the head of hydrology of the hydrology department of the Harzik Engineering Company in Chicago. His areas of expertise include the evaluation of the hydraulic properties of aquifers, the assessment of groundwater resources, and of hydrologic and water quality conditions at hazardous waste sites, and the design of monitoring of extraction well systems for water supply for groundwater remediation projects. He often provided testimony in court proceedings and/or administrative hearings as an expert witness on environmental issues related to groundwater contamination and/or remedial actions for mitigating groundwater contamination. He is the author and co-author of numerous publications of well hydraulics, aquifer test methodology, groundwater resource evaluation, and subsurface waste disposal. And Stavros has the enviable position of having methods named after him. Now, every academic would love to have methods named after him, and he's got more than one. So he actually appears on my presentations in class every year. In this regard, there is a rumor to the effect that when asked on the witness stand whether he really spoke several different languages, and I think it was like 6, he responded, indeed he did, and purportedly also English. He has received numerous professional awards as a member of NAE. Stavros? blind leading the blind here.
Let's get the one-eye guy.
Jimmy Darrow.
Well, thank you, George, and
Better use the mic here.
I'll get pictures. That's forward and backwards. All right. Yanni was saying how good George did in putting together this meeting or the symposium today. I think one of the feats was to convince me to give this keynote address. I've been telling people that as I aged and I came to an age where I don't want to take any more responsibilities, but at the same time I came to an age which has become much more easier to twist my arm. What I'm going to talk about as the subject slide shows, I'll be talking about safe yield and sustainable yield or sustainable development. Is nothing really very much new. I'll be repeating a lot of things that me and my colleagues from the survey said many years ago, and I repeat it again. So many of you probably heard them before and know about them. But since the theme of the symposium is groundwater depletion, talking about safe yield and sustainable yield seemed to be appropriate to remind people some of the basic concepts that underlie these terms. So how you define safe yield or sustainable yield or sustainable development? Well, the earliest definition, according to Bill Alley, who is going to be our luncheon speaker, who actually has also a very good paper on safe yield and sustainability, which is, I think, what's the journey from safe yield to sustainability, where he has a very good discussion of safe yield and sustainability and gives some very good examples, which I'm going to be using as well. So,
You want to move this stand over here? Why don't you stand over here? You could stand over here.
so the quantity of water that can be pumped regularly and permanently without dangerous depletion of the storage reserve. A little later, Meinzer in 1920 defined safe yield as the rate at which the groundwater can be withdrawn year after year for generations to come without depleting the supply. A few years later, he had another definition where he threw in the economic aspects of the development. And about 10 years later, he also introduced that she has to be practicable rates. So all these definitions kind of imply that if you are going to have it, do it perennially, it has to be sustainable. So the question comes, if you pump an amount equal to the recharge to the aquifer system, is that sustainable or not, or is it a safe yield? To a certain extent, if the pumpage is less than the recharge or equal to the recharge, you would say that it is sustainable. But is it a wise thing to develop? Maria Sophocleous gave a publication over there where she showed an aquifer where you have some recharge, the groundwater flows to the aquifer, and then is discharging where you have some springs and some a stream or a wetland which is supported by this discharge. If it were to be practicable to put a well system in this aquifer so that you can intercept all the discharge from the system, what you would have is dry spring, a dry stream, dry swamp area which will have the vegetation killed. So really pumping, considering recharge as being a safe yield is not an acceptable concept. It may be sustainable, but cannot be the safe yield of the aquifer, as there are some consequences to doing this. And actually, the question comes, do we even need to know the recharge to determine how much water we can develop from an aquifer? John Bridehoff and Hilton Cooper and I have published their papers back in 1982 on a National Academy of Science publication on studies in geophysics series, which we call the water budget myth. The myth in that paper, as well as in the rehashing of that paper by John Bridehoff in 2002, is that you need to know the recharge to determine how much water you can develop. You don't need to know the recharge. I'll give an example. We hydrologists like circular islands as aquifers, especially if they are in a freshwater lake. Makes our boundary very nice. You can apply radial flow equations very easily. So they are very favorite examples. Now, one can use much more complex systems with all the numerical modeling capabilities that we have. We can do it. But, you know, I'm kind of semi-retired as far as going to work, and all the modelers in my firm are 100% chargeable. So the people that are turning over the management of the company, they don't look very favorably to my pulling modelers to do some work for me that is not chargeable. So I have to stick with the simple models that I use analytical. Well, very often we talk about virgin conditions. Well, there is no such a thing as virgin conditions. Nobody knows what virgin conditions were in most aquifers. Usually go into the system after somebody has already put some wells and there is some information. So here we have a circular island about a mile in radius and four existing wells which are already pumping in the area and serving some communities in the vicinity. A new community developed in the southern part of the island. They want to put another well. And the question is how much water they can develop from that well. What the information that's available from the existing well was that we have a low permeability clay layer at an elevation at a depth of 80 feet below the lake level, and pumping tests had been conducted on these wells, which indicate hydraulic conductivity of 25 feet per day. So, what we have as information, the pumping rate of the four wells, which, as you can see, vary from 260 GPM to 300 GPM. We have the pumping level in those wells, HW. Also, a report by the driller of what was the water level after he completed the completion of the well. So we go and install the well, which we'll call well number 5. we install the well, we measure the water level, it's about 80 feet above the clay there. We conduct a pumping test on it, and it turns out that the hydraulic conductivity of the sand is pretty uniform, not different. So, how much water we can pump? One more thing I was going to say is, in general, you see that the pumping water level in all the existing wells is about 20 to 22 feet. So it looks like keeping the water level about 20 feet above the clay seems to be a wise way to develop a well. So just turns out that Jacob in 1950 had an equation for a eccentric well in a circular island where the drawdown is zero along the boundary. And Hantouche and Jacob had republished a paper looking at leaky aquifer conditions and both impermeable and coastal head boundaries as the outer boundary. But I have adapted that to water table conditions by substituting drawdown minus drawdown square over 2 times the initial head and change in the transmissivity to hydraulic conductivity times the initial thickness. So I can solve that top equation for the discharge by evaluating it at the wellhead, where SW is my pump, the drawdown I want to allow at the well. Given that the initial head was about 80 feet, and we have pumping levels around 20, we say, yeah, well, probably a drawdown of 58 feet would be good enough. And we have the hydraulic conductivity, the effective radius of the island, the eccentricity of the well, delta shows how off the center the well is. And assuming I had a 6-inch radius well, I can calculate that I can pump 53,000 cubic feet per day, or about 275 GPM from the well. So my pumping is 275, drawdown around 58 feet, and pumping level of about 22 feet. So I made all this calculation without making use of the recharge at all. But one more thing that I need to note here is, first of all, putting that well is going to have some effect on the other existing wells. We have a couple of the nearest wells will have about 2 feet of drawdown caused by this new well. And then the other 2, they have about 1 foot of drawdown, which is caused by this new well. So the question is, whereas I can pump that 275 GPM from this well, would that be acceptable to the owners of the existing wells? To a certain extent, that drawdown, either they have to increase their pumping costs, or they will have to reduce their pumping rates to accommodate this extra drawdown. Second thing is, what is all this water coming from? Water is coming all from the lake. So, assuming that what was being pumped before was acceptable withdrawal from the lake, is pulling another 275 GPM out of the lake acceptable or not acceptable? So there is something beyond sustainability that has to go into determine a safe yield. It goes back to Thijs, who said that if you have an aquifer system, you have initially some natural recharge, and this is balanced by a natural discharge from the system. Over the long term, looking at averages, recharge is equal discharge. You superimpose a new pumping on that, you will get water out of storage, and you'll continue to have water out of storage until you cause enough change in the recharge or the discharge or both to balance the new pumpage. And until you reach that balancing point, you'll be depleting the aquifer. John Bredehoff and our original papers, again, we use the circular island and make the point that before pumping, you have recharge equal to discharge. So when you superimpose a new pumpage on this original condition, you cause some change in the recharge or some change in the discharge or some change in both. But if you look at the top equation, we have R, delta R minus D, delta D. So we know from the previous slide that R minus D is equal to 0. So that equation reduces to delta R minus delta D. Both recharge and discharge drop out of the picture. The only thing that we have in the picture is the change in the discharge and the change in the recharge, plus the change in storage. Eventually, the storage, the change in the discharge or the change on the recharge or the changes in the combination of both of them balances our pumping rate, we stop depleting the aquifer, and those changes balance our pumping rate. This what we call the capture. The change in the discharge plus the change in the discharge is defined as capture. And capture is defined, as I said, the change in recharge. Water supply paper published back in 1972, which by a committee which was chaired by Stan Lohman, but included the who is who in groundwater hydrology of those years, defines capture as, refer to the size statement, is the statement that I showed, and define capture as being the sum of the change in recharge and change in discharge. Then they go on to define what may be capture, reduction, increase in leakage, reduction in discharge, and et cetera, et cetera. So, to go to a safe yield, we need to have one more factor beyond having a sustainable pumping. If we balance pumping by changing the recharge by capture, we have a sustainable system. But is being sustainable by itself sufficient to be called safe yield? In 1915, I thought I addressed that issue by saying that what you can pump from it annually, essentially it has to be sustainable without having an undesired result. Now, no definition of what undesired result, but something is undesired. Lohman, in 1972, said again about safe yield that there is as many definitions of safe yield as there are people who define it. But nevertheless, he went ahead and defined safe yield by saying that it is the amount of groundwater one can pump without getting in trouble. So, and according to Lohman, trouble was running out of water, getting water of bad quality, having a neighboring well owner shut you, being sued by LS, right? neighbor, or depleting, being sued for depleting the water supply in a nearby stream. So it is similar to Toll's definition, 1959 definition, but to a certain extent, he has defined what he considers trouble. The odd thing is that this publication that was also published at the same year, 1972, as Lohmann's, by the way, that quotes are from Lohmann's 1972 professional paper on groundwater hydraulics. The same year, they published the definitions of groundwater terms. But when you look,
We want you to sound great.
I don't want to sound great, then I will know that my accent is no good.
Now you're free, you can move around.
All right. So if you look at that book, there is no definition for safe yield. Go alphabetically, they are going from pressure, static pressure, to specific capacity. No definition of safe yield. So I don't know what's the reason. There is two possibilities. We had so many people on the committee, every one of them had a different definition, so they couldn't agree what they should put in the book as a, or they didn't like the term of safe yield. Actually, in the 50s, there was quite an opposition to using the term safe yield. Kazman and some others, they thought that we should discard the term safe yield, not use it anymore. But a few years ago, the California state legislature passed an act which they call the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and there they define sustainable management of the resource. So they say that sustainable management is management and use of groundwater in a manner that can be maintained during the planning and implementation horizon, and they are picking a 50-year planning and implementation horizon without causing undesirable results. Again, we are in the undesirable results. But they define the undesirable. They have 6 undesirable results, which are listed there. Note, however, that there's the first thing that they say, significant and unreasonable depletion of lowering of groundwater levels, seawater intrusion. All these things that they list, it's clear that they accept that if you are having a development, you are going to have these effects. So what they say, go ahead, develop, have these effects, but make sure that these effects are not significant, or that they are insignificant and reasonable. Because there's no definition what is insignificant and reasonable. So it looks like the water managers for different basins, they have to set their standards and decide what is insignificant and reasonable effect and define it. We hydrologists know how to model groundwater systems. But for us to determine and tell them how much water they can develop sustainably, we need to know what are their acceptable levels of these effects. They have to define that, and then we can do it. One more point I want to make, and I'm using here an example. It's actually a model that was by Prudick and Henry, I think, back in 1996, but which Bilali and Stan Lick had included in their paper on the journey from safe fuel to sustainability. This is a model of the Paradise Valley. And the natural flow or natural recharge to the system is 91 million cubic meters per year. It's an odd number, but you know, USGS now has been on a roll that you have to use metric system since 50 years ago with the hope that everybody is going to change to metric. Nobody changed yet, but except they still have things in metric units. 91 million cubic meters per year is something the order of 70 to 73,000 acre feet. Talking about odd units, acre feet is a good odd unit. So there is the natural flow through system is 91 million cubic meters. Most of it, about 88% of it, is seepage from perennial and permanent, perennial and intermittent streams that go through the valley. You got some inflow from the eastern part of the Humboldt River basin coming into the Paradise Valley basin, and some leakage from the rocks that border the valley deposits. The discharge from the system is through evapotranspiration all along the gray area shown in the middle of the valley, and some from the western outflow into the Humboldt River basin in the western part of the southern boundary. The interesting thing is the sources. They consider a pumpage of 44 million cubic meters per year, which is equivalent to about 32,000 acre feet per year, or something around 2,200, 2,250 gallons per minute. And they simulated the effects of this pumping for 300 years. If you note, after 1.5 years of pumping, 80% of the water is coming from storage. Another 20% is coming from reduction in evapotranspiration. But still we have 80% coming from storage, so we are depleting. After 25 years, the percentage coming from storage reduces to 44%. We get 52% from reduction of evapotranspiration, but we still have about 2% each increase in the inflow from the Humboldt River and decrease in the outflow to the Humboldt River Valley. And after 100 years, you still have 18% of the flow coming from storage. And even after 300 years, you still have 4% coming from storage. So the point is that even if you have a sustainable development, it may take a very long time to reach the sustainable one. And the final point I want to make is that with groundwater basins, unlike surface water reservoirs, the location from where you are trying to develop and the position of that location with respect to the boundaries of the system or recharge-discharge mechanism of the system is critical. Going back again to the paper by Bedihov, Papadopoulos, and Cooper, and again, as I said, John's rehashing of that paper in 2002, John Evgenen an example of a study he made when he was on leave from the survey for a year with resources for the future. And in that case, we have a aquifer system, recharges through two streams on the up gradient end of the aquifer, putting 100 CFS, and all that water is discharged by phreatophytes on the eastern part of the aquifer. And he considered two locations for a well field, which are also pumping 100 CFS. The idea is to lower the water level below the phreatophyte zone and therefore capture the water that was discharging by the phreatophytes. Remember, case one is the well field which is farther away from the phreatophyte area. Case two is closer. If you look at case one, you don't get any reduction in the consumption by the phreatophytes for 8 years before you start having some reduction. The well field which is closer, right away, within a year, you have almost 10% reduction, and by 10 years, it's all close to 50% reduction. But in the long term, reaching a sustainable condition is taking a very, very long, in the several hundred, or actually the almost close to 1,000 years of pumping before you get sustainability. So, to summarize, I have the 3 points. Sustainability of a groundwater development depends on the capture that you can induce by that development rather than on the natural recharge or discharge from the system. Second thing is safe yield, in my opinion, is the maximum water that you can develop from, sustainably develop from an aquifer without causing any undesirable or unacceptable effects. And finally, the points that I made in my last thing, the time required to achieve sustainability depends on the boundaries of the hydrologic system, the nature of the boundaries of the hydrologic system, the nature of the discharge and recharge mechanism of the system, and the location of the development with respect to these boundaries and mechanisms. And that's all I have to say. The only thing I would add here, because Bridget yesterday made a statement. She said years ago when she first started working with us, I said to her, as she was working on karst, and I told her that karst is kind of like a black box. You don't know what's happening. So she said she stopped working on it. So I want to make sure that my statements about recharge don't cause her to stop working on recharge. Because what I said is that you don't need to know the recharge to calculate development, but I didn't say that recharge is not important. It's definitely important because discharge is reflected on the water levels that you measure, and the higher the recharge, the higher the water levels. The higher the water levels, the greater the available drawdown, and yes, and hence the greater the amount of water they would develop. So definitely recharge may not be to be known, but it is definitely a very important factor in how much you can develop from an aquifer.
Let's take a minute for questions for Stavros.
Oh my God, I took too much time, did I?
Anybody have any questions?
I have one question. Very interesting talk. But how much of the world's aquifers are being depleted in a sustainable manner?
Now, it's depleted in such the high plains aquifer is being depleted in a sustainable manner, but
Or produced in a sustainable manner?
oh no, you have a lot. I mean, aquifers which are intersected by streams, definitely you can develop a sustainment because there is an acceptable reduction in stream flow that you can implement without damaging the use of the stream. I mentioned high plains. In high plains aquifer, the Ogallala, problem is that development is too far from the boundaries of the system, too far from the discharge boundaries, number one. And then the thickness is not good enough for you to impose large enough drawdown to expedite the propagation of your stress into the boundary. I don't know if that answered your question. Ali.
We can talk.
Okay.
The question I have is you defined capture as a delta recharge minus delta discharge. The question is what this delta represent in terms of the time frame. Are you talking about years? Are you talking about months? Over which we should look into change in recharge minus change in discharge.
I'm not sure I understood your question. You are saying
Time scale at which you should look
time
into.
scale completely depends on where your development is with respect to the boundaries. Take the circular island example. If we have an island which is only 1,000 feet in diameter and you are pumping from the middle, you'll propagate that effect to the boundaries very quickly, and the balancing of the reduction in the discharge will occur very quickly. On the other hand, if it is half a mile or 2 miles, then it will take a longer time. And the last two examples that I gave, it takes hundreds of years before you reach a balance between the pumpage and the change in recharge and discharge.
So could you please explain the intuition behind the figure that showed changes from like 1 year, 2 years, 100 years, and 300 years?
Oops. Is it off? Show the graph. Yeah. Which panel? The red? Oh, okay. That's the one they're talking about, right? Before this?
Farther on, one of your last ones. There.
Ah. Excuse me?
So could you please explain, like, what's the intuition behind these changes over years? How do you calculate over time period? Can you speak up?
How did you determine?
How could you calculate, like, over 300 years projection?
This was a model, a numerical model of the Paradise Valley, which you see is this a numerical model which extended so they used the model, they put the pumpage and ran the model for 300 years to see what are the effects. And at those intervals, they look at the mass balance, where is the water coming and where is it going. The numerical models that we have now, they all have a mass balance in them. So you can inquire the model to tell you where the water is coming from and where it's going at any given time.
We're going to postpone any further questions for Stavros until we have general questions for our speakers. If That would be okay, sir.
Thank you very much. No problem.